Hey everybody, Professor Harding here. I just want to talk a little bit about Barthes codes. So Roland Barthes had 5 codes that we can use to decipher a text. Scare quotes around text because anything can be a text. We could have a movie, could have an image. It's all a text. If it's constructed by human beings, it's a text. Architecture can be a text anyway. So we have 5 codes. In this assignment, you're only focusing on 3 of the 5 codes. You're focusing on the semantic value, the semantic code, the symbolic code, and the referential or cultural code. Now, this video actually goes into the hermeneutic code too, so I'll mention that, but that's not my focus. Anyway, semantic code. Semantic code is all about connotative value. So let me just kind of move into this video quickly here. So I can fast forward it a little bit. Let's just start with the color green. The connotative value for the color green. So if we were in high school or junior high and you're reading a book and you're asked to talk about the symbolism in the story, you can say, oh, the color green represents whatever. A lot of times we need context for this kind of thing. So the color green can represent a lot. It can represent envy, it can represent sickness, right? Green to the gills. In this instance, I think we can say that it represents life. It represents life because the color green is the door. The door is green, but just behind the door, there's a garden. So the garden gives us some context for what green represents in this case. If behind the door it was a bank vault, then we would say, oh, this is envy, money, maybe jealousy. But in this instance, we're talking about life and vitality. So we're going to move on a little bit here. We get a glimpse. We're kind of voyeurs. We get a glimpse of an old man and a young man sitting in a garden. The old man, of course, looks a little depressed. The young man looks a little busy with his newspaper. But what we have here is a garden. Again, we're talking about connotative value. What's the connotative value of a garden? It's a place of life. It's a place of vitality. And if we look at the grass in the garden, we can see that it's slightly overgrown. Nobody's mowed it. So it's a little bit unkempt, which means that, it's filled with life. It's filled with vitality. So some semantically, our semantic code here with the garden, with the green door, is all suggesting life and vitality. And we have the sparrow.
That's what you do.
The sparrow again, representing life, vitality. We could go a little bit further and say it represents freedom of movement, this idea of flight, right? Expansiveness, openness, this idea of possibility. And I think all the garden, the sparrow, all talk about like life and possibility. Now, at the same time, moving down into the symbolic code. The symbolic code is not what you think. It's not the code that's behind symbols like Christian crosses and Egyptian ankhs and Jewish stars of David. That's not the symbolic code. The symbolic code comes together when we have 2 semantic codes that are in opposition to each other. So they create a kind of antithesis. And that's what we have here. We have an old man in a garden. We have an old man. Obviously, he's asking questions. What is it? So we can make an assumption here. It's not. I don't think it's too much of a jump to say that he has Alzheimer's and he's losing his mind. He's on the edge, right, of senility, or he's already there, and he seems to be almost like the son is the caretaker in a way. So the old man is not free. He is not does not have vitality. He's actually on the other end of the spectrum. And so we have this tension here within the story, within the film, where the garden is at the antithesis of the old man. And so this creates a symbolic structure through which we can actually understand how these codes are working. The old man is frail. The garden is filled with life. So what does this do for the rest of the story? Well, it sets the stage for that story to take place. Now we understand like what's going on here. We've got the tension, so we can see how things play out. Obviously, the young man is going to be a little bit upset at his father.
Μόλις τώρα στο πατέρα σπουργίτη είναι.
Τι είναι αυτό?
Ένα σπουργίτη είναι, πατέρα. Ένα σπουργίτη. Σπου-γι-τι!
Τι είναι αυτό?
Γιατί το κάνεις αυτό το πράγμα, μπορείς να μου πεις? Τόσες φορές σου είπα, είναι ένα σπουργίτη! Δεν το καταλαβαίνεις! Πού πας?
So I'm going to fast forward through this section. The old man goes into his house. And he brings out a book.
Δυνατά.
Σήμερα ο μικρός μου γιος που πριν λίγες μέρες έκλεισε τα 3 καθόταν μαζί μου έξω στο πάρκο όταν ένας σπουργίτη ήρθε και κάθισε απέναντί μας. Ο γιος μου με ρώτησε 21 φορές τι ήταν αυτό και του απάντησα και τις 21 φορές ότι ήταν ένα σπουργίτη. Τον αγκάλιασα τρυφερά και τις 21 φορές που μου έκανε την ίδια ερώτηση ξανά και ξανά χωρίς να εκνευριστώ, νιώθοντας στοργή για το αθώο μου αγοράκι.
Now, so going back to the film, everything kind of made sense with the symbolic code, the semantic code. We got the garden, and then we understood the whole life and vitality, and then everything really came into focus with the symbolic code. We saw the old man on one end, and the vivacious garden on the other, and we had this tension in play. The son seems to be kind of on the garden side. He's young, he's got a lot of energy. Then there's a switch. We move away from the semantic symbolic code when the old man goes into the house and gets a book and brings it back to the son. This is more hermeneutic code because we have some questions of like, what's going on here? What's this all about? Not really sure. Can't quite figure it out. And it's almost as if the director really doesn't trust the audience to get it or doesn't know a way through. And so he relies on this, the prop of the book. Now, if the old man really had Alzheimer's and he's at the point where he doesn't remember what a sparrow is after being told 10 seconds ago, then what's the possibility that he's going to go back into his house and, find a diary? Obviously, he's got a series of journals because this is one when the boy is 3 years old, and he finds that particular journal and he finds that particular page with that particular instance of the sparrow, and he brings it out to his son as if to say, hey, you should treat me different. So that's all hermeneutic code right there, where the explanation, everything that was kind of bothering you and you didn't really understand, suddenly it all becomes clear. But I think that the director has to rely on that prop, and when he does that, he basically undercuts the story, or this idea that the old man is actually as frail and at the end of life as we would assume with the semantic and symbolic code. But that's pretty much how semantic codes work. It's all at the connotative level. You have to make some assumptions about what different scenes or situations represent. Well, they're usually they're nouns, they're places, they're things, they're people. The sparrow, the garden, the color green, and we have to try to figure out what they mean. But it's not as if we're doing it on our own. And this is kind of where the cultural code comes in. The color green, it means certain things, right? It means go, it means sickness, it means envy, it means life. But there are certain things that it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean stop. It doesn't mean, well, I guess green can mean health, but green doesn't mean caution. There's a lot of things that green doesn't mean because as a society, as a culture, we have assigned certain values to the color green and certain values that we have not assigned to the color green. So you have to, in order to come up with an interpretation that, the color green here means, that we should care for the elderly, that's totally on your own. There's nothing in our culture that suggests that kind of a reading. So you really have to, in order to operate within the semantic code, you have to understand that cultural code, how our culture or society has assigned certain meanings to certain things, certain places, and certain people. And that's how we kind of make sense of the semantic code. The symbolic code, of course, is something, again, we always are referencing that cultural code. It's like our society, how it creates meaning. So we know in our society that somebody that's elderly is frail, but they may be also somebody who's elderly has wisdom. And so the man kind of comes across like that. He's teaching his son a lesson, and, the son kind of comes to his senses, and, finally appreciates the elderly like he should, right? Because in society, especially in Europe, it's like the old are supposed to be appreciated, but really they're not. So that's probably the reason why this public service announcement film is on the internet. Anyway, hopefully that wasn't too confusing. I guess what I'm trying to get at here is just to give you an example of semantic code, how it works at the connotative level, how once we get semantic codes, we can look and see if any of them are in opposition to each other. If there are, we can kind of make this assumption that there must be a symbolic code in play, and the symbolic code is actually setting up a structure for the narrative that's going to take place. And then, of course, we can't really make sense of the semantic code unless we are using that cultural referential code. We have to know the connotative value of these things and places and people within our society in order to interpret. But I just wanted to give you a basic overview. So if you were a little bit confused, that's how it works. So when you think about your own personality poll, think about it in terms of semantic codes. Think about it in terms of symbolic codes. If there are things in your personality poll that are in opposition to each other and yet they're in the poll, then that creates a kind of symbolic structure through which we can understand what it is that you're trying to say about yourself. And a lot of you don't discount the fact that that kind of inner Harpo Marx part of you, the subconscious, actually had a role in your personality poll. So there are probably things that you did that you really didn't understand what you were doing, but now when you look back at it, it kind of makes sense. And so maybe that inner Harpo Marx subconscious part of you actually took control, and that's why that image is in play. Or maybe it does mean this one thing, but it also means this other thing. And you kind of have your own little aha moment, like, oh wow, I didn't know how clever I was. Don't discount that. So anyway, that's all I have for you. Hopefully it helps. And I will be talking to you soon.